Your genealogy and family history can document your roots, your traditions, and your life experiences using multimedia. Hello, I'm Jim Radford, a video producer who's taken an interest in family histories, and I've helped some others develop a graphical approach to their own projects. When we accept the role of the family archivist, we face the immediate question of how do we organize and display all that information, assuming we've already researched the genealogy of our ancestors. Well, I'm not a professional genealogist nor a historian, but perhaps like you, I have boxes and boxes of family pictures and records that need indexing, sorting, restoring, and proper display. Maybe someday it'll all be organized like this library room, each story in its own book. But today there are even better ways to display your family history electronically. So this program is more about the display process. We'll talk to a few people who have done their own, and to some experts who can also help. And since this is the medium of video, we'll especially look at how video can spice up your story. So let's get started. First, I believe that a genealogy is one thing and a family history is another. Let's define the genealogy as a written record of the descent of a person, their family, or a group of ancestors. It's a family tree, a lineage or pedigree chart, and that takes research. Whereas a family history is inclusive of the genealogy, but is also a collection of stories about the people in your family, their surroundings, experiences, traditions, and values. The family history puts a face and a voice on a name and may follow the progression of a family's migration, their skills, their religion, businesses, common values, education, ethnicity, language, and traditions. So documenting all that might seem like a daunting task. How would you begin? And how do you know when you're finished? What's the scope of your family tree? These are all critical issues to answer before you begin. I spoke with one family historian here in the Twin Cities, Wendy Kay Deal, whose family comes from Pennsylvania. She had boxes of photos, data, and even a famous relative. Just as important, she had an articulate grandmother with a long memory. So Wendy Kay approached her family history initially as a video project.
This whole project started with a large box of photos that we found in my grandmother's basement. And when we started looking at the photos, we found that nobody in the photos had been marked on the back. And so it started as a project to simply label the photos with the people in them so that we could collect them in a meaningful way. And as the project went on, and my grandmother through this entire process would tell stories. As soon as she would see a photo, it would spark other memories of her, whether it be of her childhood, of relatives, of friends and families. And so there was a lot more information than what the photo itself projected. And when we started putting the photos into albums, I didn't really feel that it captured the story that we were trying to tell of our family, and that even more important, that only my grandmother could tell. And so at that point decided that a video was the best way for us to preserve the memories of our family through my grandmother and have a legacy to pass down to future generations.
I was married I graduated from high school in 1947, and that's the year we got married, in the fall of 1947. I married Harry Deal, and we had 2 children, of course, David and Daniel. And I would have loved to have had a girl, but I couldn't see having a baseball team to get a girl. So, and then I got my first grandchild, and that was Wendy, and I was very pleased because I wanted a girl so much always. And my mother always appreciated that she had one girl, you know. She had 3 boys. And
my grandmother has the most knowledge, I think, of our entire family. From the history of her growing up, she just has an incredible memory with very vivid recollections of experiences as a child and experiences with other members of our family who are no longer with us. And she was in the best position to tell the story behind the photos, to tell the story of who my great-grandparents were and what values were passed down from generation to generation. Much more information than you could ever hope to get out of a photo. And this is a legacy that can not only be shared by me, but can be shared by my brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts and uncles. So it's something that was built that the entire family can now benefit from and enjoy.
She also had one famous relative that I'll tell you about, was Annie Oakley. Her mother's name, her father's name was Wise, and Annie Oakley was related to the Wises, and she actually met Annie Oakley when she was a young girl. That they had been, she was in a Wild West show, and they came to our area, and they stayed with some of my relatives. But I always heard the story about meeting Annie Oakley, and she was a sharpshooter. But the reason that she was a sharpshooter was they lived out in Ohio, and they were very poor, and she supplied the family with game and stuff for their, in order for them to survive. And that's how she got to be such a good marksman.
Another family historian is Stuart Randall, a retired chemist who lives in Wilmington, Delaware. He wrote a book about his family, starting the research way back 50 years ago. Recently, we spoke by phone to Stuart about approaching relatives for stories in that book.
I started this work over 50 years ago. That's how long I've been working on it, but I didn't work on it full time. But, I just assembled it a little bit 45 years ago. I assembled it a little bit 35 years ago, and as I went along, the goals changed as to what the final thing was going to be, and I still got a little bit more to do. Finally, I get around to documenting the genealogy records. However, I decided to flower the genealogy records up in many interesting stories. I believe this flowering is necessary because the reading of pure genealogy records tends to be boring. My goals for a family history were simple. I simply wished to document the family history for just a couple generations. If I didn't do this, it would not get done, and the information would be lost forever. I also learned the Finns came to Finland eons ago by the way of the Ural Mountains in Russia. It is interesting that my DNA analysis completed for me by the National Geographic Association confirmed this route with even more details. So, with the availability of computer word processors, I drafted a book on my father's side that included maps and 154 pictures. On mother's side, the book also contained maps, but with only 40 pictures. A local printer duplicated the pages and assembled several dozen books with a spiral binding. These books have been placed in many libraries in Wisconsin, including even the Mormon Library in Salt Lake City. My scope in the beginning was just to document a few generations because I thought that's all I would get. And then as I went into this, I got more. And so then that made the scope change. And I didn't have to elect to put any of that in, but I had the information. So it started to the scope broaden. I was kind of forced to broaden the scope.
So one of the key decisions is about scope. For a family history, decide the time frame and the extent of the linkages. Will you show only the immediate family or include in-laws, divorcees, and adoptees on one side or both sides of the family? Will a book or a video focus on the entire charted genealogy or just those recent generations that provide visual images. Sometimes keeping it simple may limit the content, but it assures you of finishing the project within a short time frame. Others, like Stuart's book, are a labor of love over a lifetime with a periodic update. So, here are 8 steps recommended by the Minnesota Historical Society to approach the scope of a family history. First, start with what you know. Find names, locations, dates, and stories, beginning with you and working back through time. Second, decide what facts you want to find. Set priorities. Zero in on a particular person and an event. Then ask yourself, what information do you still need? Step 3. Determine the kind of record you need and the authority that created it. The Minnesota Historical Society has many types of documents and publications that can help, and they offer classes every month. Step 4. Record your results and document your research. Write down everything that you would need to find the fact again. Step 5. Decide what you want to find out next. Set new priorities. Zero in on another person and another event. Then ask yourself, what information do you need about them? Step 6. Back at home, search your own records. Talk to other family members. Review deeds. Look at Bibles, scrapbooks, and photo albums. Who are the keepers of history in your family? Step 7. Read about the areas in which your ancestors lived. Become a student of that country's history and maybe learn the language. Step 8. Read about doing family research. Join a family history society and attend its meetings. One very interesting display is at the Historical Society and about the family homestead. If only those walls could talk. When was it built? And by whom? How much did it cost to build? And what did the original owners do for a living? Where were they from? What did your home look like 100 years ago? Was the garage originally a horse barn or built later? Doing some research can answer these and other questions. One starting point is the building permit. From 1883 forward, every house built in the city of St. Paul required a building permit. 90% of those permits still exist. And the permits usually include information on the dates of construction, architect and contractor, dimensions of the house, ownership, and the cost. There's also the home's abstract or deed. The abstract is the document that records all legal transactions associated with the property. Not only can you find out who owned the house, but you can find out who built the house. And most people are given the abstract upon its purchase. There are also city directories, which list the people living in a household and their professions, and census records, also on file at the Historical Society. Property plats and insurance maps and newspaper stories are all very helpful. Many people document their vacations and their holidays with home videos. One of the best things you can do from a historical perspective is to narrate the program while or after you record it. This helps identify the people and the place and can be even quite entertaining. So obtaining photos, films, and video of your activities, property, and people can be a very enriching and relevant component of your family story. And as a side benefit, all the images can be digitized or scanned for your archives on the internet or put into a disk to prevent further fading or damage. But what if your photos do suffer from damages over the years? From scratches, dust, discoloration, or they may be torn, at which point you may need a computer program like Adobe's Photoshop or the skills of a specialist like Carol Adele Jewett, who owns Artful Imaging in the Roseville Harmar Shopping Mall. She does some magical photo restoration work.
You asked me for an example of something very difficult. I think I have a real good one. A gentleman came in with a picture of his wife dressed up for the prom when they were in high school. He said, "Is there anything you can do with this?" Here's the picture. My first temptation was to say no. This is the actual picture. He gave me permission to keep it because I don't think anybody would believe if they didn't see it that this actually happened. I was able with Photoshop to increase the contrast enough to be able to see the outlines at least of what was going on, and then using some tools to color and enhance that, I was able to come up with this. He and his wife were both very amazed. I was pleased. And they were able to keep a memory that had faded with age. Example. These people came in with a picture that wasn't all that old, but it had been very poorly cared for. It had chunks missing. It had cracks, even across people's faces. And they wanted something it could display that would look good. We scanned it in. We actually cut off some of the area that was damaged because it would have been expensive and it wasn't really necessary to the picture. When we fixed it and created an 8x10 out of it instead of the 16x20 they originally had brought in, they had something that they could hang on the wall, put on a desk, give copies to relatives, and it looked like it had never been damaged. To keep us photo safe, dry, dark, and flat. There are archival boxes that are sold for that purpose. You can also use any acid-free media to store something flat. However, if you want to display it, I would suggest you get a copy for display. Keep your originals in that dry, dark, flat place.
Exploring your ethnicity may be another key component of the family story. We all feel pride in our heritage and our ethnic roots, whether it's Irish, Finnish, African, or Asian. In today's diluted American culture, it's more difficult to stay linked with our ethnic past, its language, religion, and cultural ties of the family from one country to another. For more about this, I spoke by phone with Eleanor Stoller, a PhD sociologist in North Carolina, who talked about the importance of family ethnicity.
I know that people who have had a close relationship with a grandparent, especially a grandmother, it seems from the literature, who is an immigrant or is close to an immigrant experience, tend to identify more with that ethnic background. Or even people that maybe have a family where there's 3 or 4 ethnic heritages blended together, that if they have a close relationship with a grandmother who is Norwegian, for example, that relationship will enhance their attention to their Norwegian heritage. Clearly, ethnicity is going to be more salient in a family that has a single ethnic background. This information is going to be gone if I don't get it written down or get it recorded or get the stories. I wish I'd started it sooner. When my grandmother was in a nursing home, I was in college, and I would come home and go and visit her. I mean, I was always really close to my grandmother, so it wasn't like I didn't want to visit her when I think back. But now I'm really sorry I didn't tape it. I'd like to have had her voice telling those stories. Christmas Eve was always our big celebration at Christmas. We had certain foods that we always ate. My mother and dad would always pay attention if there was a Finnish performer coming to sing with the symphony. If there was, in the Olympics, we would always root for the Finnish contestants in the Olympics, and they would point out if there was a famous Finnish person, an actor or a hockey player or something, or something about Finland in the news. We had things we always had sort of artifacts in the home, certain kinds of dishes or glassware, Finnish linens, Well, we certainly had quite a collection of Sibelius that we always played, but we still had some old 78s of the old Finn Hall dance music that my grandparents had.
So you want to start your project now, but keep it really simple and graphical. Well, the web may be a huge help for display and distribution. Here's an example of a biography built from only a dozen well-chosen still photos about one person using text that spans almost a lifetime. It's a great story and written to be concise, illustrated, and interesting. It's on its own web page that people throughout the family, throughout the world, can view at any time. And if you want to enrich it with a soundbite or a video clip, well, that's easy to do today on the web. The next step might be one more biography, and when time permits, another biography, until the key branches of your tree are filled with dozens of short stories about individual ancestors. And then you might have enough photos or letters for an online document archive to replace that disorganized shoebox. Okay, you might need a web professional to build it, or you could use inexpensive software like SureThing Photo Plus by Microvision Development. This will produce both a web page and a CD disc, and it's all searchable using keywords, dates, names, and so forth. That's the powerful feature, locating the stuff on demand. And now a summary of points about producing your own family history with multimedia. Let's look again at Wendy Kay's family video, which uses a professionally produced animation of still photos at the beginning and then introduces her grandmother to tell the family story. Notice how comfortable she is, like talking to her own grandchildren, and how pictures and music subtly help the presentation.
Well, I'll start by saying that I was born in Duncansville, Pennsylvania. The date was 7/29/29, which is my birth date. And
the first task in developing Wendy's project was to define her scope and develop a plan. She decided early on that her grandmother would informally narrate a video, but it could be anyone, even with a formal script, which lists each of the 400 pictures that she chose for this production. Next, organize key sections like chapters, starting with the early or childhood years, transitioning to natural events or topics like schooling, marriage and children, employment, travel and leisure, family and traditions, and perhaps a section about values, philosophies, or principles. Third, you'll want to sort the photos and the videos into those chapters. And most important, include a caption with names and dates to appear on the screen with the images. This can be made a lot easier if you organize your visuals in advance. In fact, over several years. Remember, it's a process, not an event. Here's what I like to do to avoid the mess. It looked like this before, boxes full of tapes and photos, and now it's all indexed and copied onto DVDs. These discs are compact, secure, low cost, and searchable. Plus, videotape is going the way of old wire recordings. The key is to digitally archive your material with a high level of showcase quality, so it can all be searched, stored, displayed, and swapped with relatives well into the future. Of course, you'll want to securely store any keepsake originals. Next, develop a written outline for the program. Some people do this with a simple post-it note on the wall, representing chapters or each photo, and then rearrange them later. Or produce a listing of topics within each primary chapter. Fifth, now that you have the plan and the material, record the narrative. It should support the chapter logic and the images. Now here's a tip. Not every word of the narrative needs to be associated with a photo. A dozen or more photos can run just over music, like Johnny Comes Marching Home Again to Civil War pictures. But there should be clear linkage. Music is the glue that connects parts of your program and fills in any informational gaps. But the narration is the structural foundation. A good narrative, which is not too wordy, really improves a program's value compared to a rather boring and static photo montage. Now finally, you might want to use some genealogy charts just to help viewers understand the relationships within the family. But keep these simple and with large type. You can create them easily using PowerPoint and convert those slides to JPEG images for your video. I hope you've enjoyed this overview of developing the family history. There's a lot to consider that I didn't even cover. But the key thing is the story. As your family archivist, define a realistic scope. Probably not as far back as Adam and Eve, but featuring interesting people who have had experiences that will be of interest for generations to come. It's all about your family identity. And while it's important to get the facts right, it's also important to be a good storyteller. Thanks for watching, and if you have any comments or questions about this program, feel free to contact me at jcradford@yahoo.com.